I've delivered food to some strange places before, but nothing prepared me for that night. A delivery driver gets an order at midnight to an isolated house on the outskirts of town. The customer leaves cryptic instructions to come inside and place the food on the table. The night was pitch black, and my car's headlights barely cut through the fog. I had one last delivery for the evening. A house so far off the beaten path that even my GPS seemed confused. When I pulled up to the address, the house looked abandoned. Boarded up windows, peeling paint, and a mailbox leaning at an odd angle. But there it was, clear as day on my app. The instructions were even stranger. Come inside, leave the food on the table. Normally, I'd leave the bag on the porch, snap a photo, and be done. But for some reason, something compelled me to follow the instructions. Maybe it was the hefty tip promised on the app, a ridiculous amount for such a remote delivery. I grabbed the bag and walked up the creaking steps. The front door was unlocked, opening with a slow groan. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of mildew and something faintly metallic. My footsteps echoed as I moved through the dimly lit space. There was a single table in the center of what looked like a living room, covered in dust except for a perfectly clean spot where the bag was meant to go. Inside, the house appears abandoned, with the food left uneaten on the table. A voice calls out from a dark hallway, but no one is visible. As I placed the bag down, I heard it, a soft voice from somewhere deeper in the house. "Thank you." I froze. It was faint, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. No response. My heart raced as I turned to leave, but just as I reached the door, I heard it again. This time, louder. "Thank you for delivering." Footsteps follow the driver to the door as they try to leave. A sudden text message from the app warns, "Don't go inside. Report any suspicious activity to the authorities." I bolted for the door, my pulse pounding in my ears. Just as I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. It was a message from the delivery app. "Do not enter customer residences. Report any suspicious activity immediately." I stared at the message, cold dread washing over me. Why now? Why send this warning after I'd already gone inside? Behind me, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the creaky wooden floor. Slow, deliberate, and getting closer. I didn't turn around. I didn't want to see what was there. The driver turns to see their own reflection in a shattered mirror, but the reflection is grinning while they're not. I ran to my car and slammed the door shut, fumbling with the keys. As the engine roared to life, I glanced up at the house one last time. That's when I saw it, my reflection in a shattered window pane near the door. But it wasn't just a reflection. It was me, grinning from ear to ear, even though my face was frozen in terror. The customer's voice whispers, "Thanks for delivering yourself." As I sped away, the voice echoed in my head, chilling and inescapable. "Thanks for delivering yourself." I never took another late-night order again. I had one last delivery before calling it a night, but the address didn't match any apartment in the complex. A driver is sent to deliver food to a unit in an old, run-down apartment complex. On arrival, they find the floor numbers missing from the elevator panel, forcing them to take the stairs. It was a rainy night, and I was exhausted after a double shift. The last delivery of the day popped up just as I was about to log off. It was a large order, pizza, wings, the works, with a big tip attached. The address was a rundown apartment complex I'd passed by a few times but never delivered to before. When I arrived, the building looked even worse up close. The flickering lobby light barely illuminated the cracked tiles and graffiti-covered walls. The elevator was out of service with a crudely written note taped to the door. "Use stairs." The delivery unit appears locked and covered in cobwebs, but there's a slip of paper pinned to the door with the message, "Leave the food. Do not knock." I climbed the stairs, my arms aching from the weight of the food bag. The higher I went, the more the air felt wrong. It was colder, heavier, as if the building itself was holding its breath. When I reached the specified floor, the hallway was pitch black. I used my phone's flashlight to find the unit number. The door was different from the others, older, with deep scratches gouged into the wood. A slip of paper was pinned to it, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Leave the food. Do not knock." Something about it made my skin crawl. I left the bag as instructed and turned to leave. That's when I noticed it. The food bag I just placed was back in my hands, as if I'd never set it down. My heart skipped a beat. As they descend the stairs, the driver hears footsteps behind them and notices the food bag is back in their hands, as if they never delivered it. I hurried down the stairs, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The sound of footsteps followed me, perfectly in sync with mine. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I ran. The footsteps ran. By the time I reached the lobby, I was shaking so hard I nearly dropped the bag. They later discovered the apartment burned down years ago, with a tenant dying inside. The order was placed under their name. Back in my car, I checked the app. The customer's name seemed familiar, so I searched it online. My stomach dropped when I found the news article. The tenant of that unit had died in a fire 5 years ago. The building's upper floors had been condemned ever since. The driver receives a notification that the customer has tipped generously, followed by the same food order for the next night. As I sat there trying to make sense of it all, my phone buzzed with a notification. The customer had left a generous tip, but that wasn't the worst part. A new order popped up on my screen, the exact same one for the same address. I didn't think twice when the app redirected me to a new address until I got there. A driver receives a last-minute address change for a delivery, but arrives at a seemingly abandoned, overgrown property in the middle of nowhere. It was supposed to be a simple delivery, just some Chinese takeout to a suburban neighborhood not far from downtown. But halfway through the drive, my phone buzzed with a notification. Customer has updated the delivery address. I'd had this happen before, usually when people forgot to update their info on the app. But when I saw the new location, my stomach churned. It wasn't on any well-lit street. Instead, it was deep in the countryside at a property I'd never seen before on my usual routes. Still, a job's a job. The customer even added a note. "Don't worry, the house looks a little overgrown. Just leave the food on the porch." The house is surrounded by dense trees, its windows shattered and boarded up. The air smells of decay, and the porch creaks ominously underfoot. When I arrived, the house looked like it hadn't been lived in for decades. The yard was an unkempt jungle of weeds and brambles, and the porch sagged dangerously under my weight. A single dim light flickered inside, casting eerie shadows onto the cracked walls. I knocked out of habit, even though the note specifically said to leave the food. No one answered. As I turned to leave, I heard a soft creak behind me, like someone stepping on the porch. As the driver walks back to their car, they notice a figure watching them from the window. Moments later, they receive a text message. "Why did you leave so soon?" I turned my head sharply toward the window, heart pounding. A figure was standing there, a pale, shadowy outline. I could feel their gaze on me, even though I couldn't make out any eyes. I stumbled backward and sprinted to my car, locking the doors the second I got in. My phone buzzed just as I started the engine. It was a message from the app. "Why did you leave so soon?" I didn't get my food. The app history shows the original address as the only one ever listed. When the driver tries to confirm the order, they see an old news article about the property, a site of unsolved disappearances. I glanced back at the house as I drove away. The light inside had gone out, but I could still see the figure standing in the darkness, motionless. Once I was safely on the main road, I pulled over to report the incident to the app. But when I checked the order history, there was no record of the address change. It still showed the original suburban house as the destination. Shaking, I searched for the address online. My blood turned cold as the results loaded. A series of disappearances had been reported there decades ago, The property had been abandoned ever since. Days later, the driver finds the same food bag on their own doorstep, with a note that reads, "You forgot to deliver this." 3 days later, I came home to find something waiting on my doorstep. The same food bag I'd delivered that night, cold and soggy. Pinned to it was a note scrawled in shaky handwriting, "You forgot to deliver this."
The customer never said a word, but their silence was the most terrifying part. A driver receives a request for a contactless delivery at a house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Upon arrival, the house seems normal, but the customer keeps texting strange, one-word messages. The order came in just after sunset, contactless delivery to a small house at the end of a cul-de-sac. The instructions were straightforward. Leave the food on the front steps. Do not ring the bell. When I arrived, the house was eerily quiet, with neatly trimmed hedges and a perfectly clean driveway. But something about it felt off. Maybe it was the lack of any lights inside, or the strange stillness that hung over the property. As I placed the food on the steps, my phone buzzed with a message from the customer. Stay. The driver receives a series of cryptic texts from the customer, each more unsettling than the last. They claim to be watching the driver but are nowhere to be seen. I froze, staring at the screen. Maybe they meant to type something else. I looked around, but there was no one in sight. As I got back into my car, another message came through. Don't leave yet. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I glanced at the house, half expecting to see someone watching from a window, but all the blinds were drawn. Another text arrived. I see you. The driver attempts to leave but finds that their car won't start. They receive a final text. Come inside. I turned the key in the ignition, but the car wouldn't start. Panic surged through me as I tried again and again, but the engine just sputtered. My phone buzzed again. This time, the message was chillingly direct. Come inside. I looked up at the house. The front door was ajar, swinging slightly in the breeze. The driver flees on foot and later discovers their car abandoned in the same neighborhood, with the food bag inside and a note that reads, "Thanks for joining me." I wasn't about to find out what was inside that house. I grabbed my bag and bolted, running down the empty street until I found another car driving by. I flagged them down and begged for a ride to the nearest gas station. The next morning, I reported my car stolen. When the police found it a few streets away, the food bag was sitting in the passenger seat, untouched. A note was taped to the dashboard. Thanks for joining me. Weeks later, the driver gets another order from the same customer with a new note. This time, don't run. I blocked the customer on the app, but weeks later, another order came in under a different name. The delivery note chilled me to the core. This time, don't run.